Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along. Which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ziprecruiter.com/zip. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
See why 4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free at ziprecruiter.com/zip. That's ziprecruiter.com/zip. ziprecruiter.com/zip.
Welcome to Autistic Stuff for Autistic People, a podcast in which a few autistic friends talk about their lived experiences and special interests. We are here to invite you into our world as autistic peers, sharing relatable conversations about life as autistic people. Based on our experiences in creating peer support spaces online, we believe that introspective interpersonal connection is where some of the most lasting internal insights can come from. This podcast is for autistic people and anyone that lives with, works with, or loves an autistic person. I am Aradia, and I am also a podcast host and producer for Fox and Raven Media. I'm going to introduce the podcast a little bit first, then ask my fellow hosts to introduce themselves, and finally, I'll introduce myself in more detail. Welcome to the first episode of Autistic Stuff for Autistic People. Today, we are going to talk about ourselves so that you can start to meet us and learn what we will be bringing to this podcast. As the producer of the team, I also want to introduce the podcast as a concept briefly. We all met in the context of autistic peer support spaces and have become the Autistic Peer Support Coaching Collective in the last year. We are autistic professional peer support coaches working with our fellow autistic adults in our communities and globally, supporting the autistic community with neuroaffirming, transparent, authentic, and practical peer support and life coaching rooted in the neurodiversity paradigm. The entire point of peer support coaching is that we benefit massively from hearing each other's stories about existing as autistic people in this world. Podcasts are an excellent medium for spreading those stories farther afield. This podcast is meant to share our experiences, observations, and knowledge about autism. However, that is not all we will do. We are not just autism coaches, we are also autistic people. So, we will be expressing our authentic autistic selves by info-dumping on our special interests, sharing stories about life that are just a good tale, and tangenting into weird little niches that nobody could have anticipated. Each podcast episode will roughly correspond to one of 3 points of a triangle: lived experiences, special interests, and autism-specific information. All the hosts will take turns suggesting and leading conversations, and we'll do our best to rotate through the themes in a semi-regular rhythm. At least, that is what my producer brain thinks is going to happen here at the beginning. As anyone who has ever done a project knows, no plan survives first contact with the creativity. Now that you know my plan for the podcast, I'll let my co-hosts introduce themselves.
All right. Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Cheryl, and I am a 40-something late-discovered autistic woman from Canada. Among my many jobs, I have worked in education, sales, health and wellness, and the nonprofit world. I have also had the privilege of traveling and earning degrees in history, political science, and education. My main passions are gender equality and justice, ancient and modern approaches to healing and spirituality, autism, and understanding high-control religions and cults. For fun, I love doing yoga, hiking, watching movies, reading a good murder mystery, taking a course to learn something new, working with body talk, reflexology, and coaching clients, and cheering on the Philadelphia Phillies. A little bit of background. On October 17th, 2023, at the age of 40, a doctor confirmed what I had suspected for several months. I am autistic. Since then, I have learned more about autism than I ever thought possible. And I've also had the privilege of connecting with so many autistic people in online neuroaffirming communities. In addition to learning how to identify and advocate for my own needs, discover and affirm my strengths, and acknowledge and address my unique challenges, I have learned to give myself grace and compassion in a world not built for me. But how did I get here? Growing up, I experienced several challenges that made it next to impossible for anyone to notice at the time that I am actually autistic. But in hindsight, there were definitely signs. As the oldest daughter in a large family, I felt a huge amount of responsibility from a very young age. It seemed like I always needed to be perfect and take care of other people's emotional needs. Further, in an environment that my overstimulated nervous system interpreted as continually chaotic, I always felt too sensitive, but I didn't have the words to share what I was feeling. It was hard for me to make and keep friends, and I preferred to spend time with my family or reading by myself. I also grew up in a high-control religious environment and dealt with years of spiritual abuse that affected every area of my life, including people-pleasing, extensive fear, guilt, and shame, the inability to connect to or trust my body and intuition, missed developmental stages, especially concerning relationships, perfectionism, anxiety and depression, and much more. Many of these challenges mirror the challenges autistic people experience, but I attributed them to spiritual abuse rather than autism. Further, high control religion rooted in fear from a very young age created the impetus for me to mask my needs in order to stay safe in what my nervous system perceived to be an extremely dangerous situation. I also have PMDD. From the time I was 11, I experienced agonizing periods and emotional dysregulation every month. It was hard to know the real me when I was so often in pain or disassociating. I know now that PMDD often co-occurs with autism, with 92% of autistic women in one study meeting the criteria for PMDD compared to only 11% of their non-autistic peers. However, at that time, I felt like it was just one more way that my body was betraying me, rather than a clue about my autism. In my adult life, I did many things that were expected of me. I earned 3 degrees, traveled the world, had a long-term partner at one point, eventually became a teacher, and worked in stressful situations. However, I could never understand why everything was so hard for me. It took me twice as long with intense effort to do what other people could do easily. I was constantly burning out and required extensive time alone. By the time I reached 40, I was teaching in the Arctic and could just muster enough energy to do my job, barely. When I got home after a day of teaching high school, I could barely do anything except rest, watch movies, and be in silence. I had spent so much of my life trying so hard to be and do what was expected of me, at the expense of my physical and mental health, I didn't know any other way. It was during this time that the algorithm gods started showing me videos and essays of late discovered autistic women. These first-hand accounts stopped me in my tracks. I could resonate with so much of what I was hearing and reading. For the first time, I felt hope that perhaps there was a reason for my struggles, outside of my inner voice that I was broken, defective, stupid, or lazy, and that there were other people like me. After I returned home to Ontario, I reached out to a neuropsychologist for assessment, and she confirmed my hopes. Soon after, I found an actually autistic peer support coach, along with workshops filled with other autistic people on a journey of self-discovery. Now I know more about my needs and how to ensure they are met. I was also able to move past a focus on my challenges and limitations and begin to recognize my strengths. I am a kind and compassionate person who loves to learn and appreciates the beauty all around me. I notice patterns and can understand complex topics and then explain them simply to other people. I now see my sensitivity as a strength instead of a weakness, and I am proud of my strong sense of justice. Finally, for the first year, I devoured everything I could get my hands on about autism. Now my time spent reading and watching videos about autism has decreased, and I am leaning into exploring my own lived experiences and trusting myself as the expert. I love myself and accept my disability now more than ever, and I am so lucky to be coaching and supporting other autistic people now too. I am eager for everyone listening to get to know us as we explore a variety of topics as autistic people navigating a neurotypical world. Thank you.
Nice. Love it. Patrice, you want to go next?
Okay. And I'm more on the spectrum of where Matthew said it's kind of like meltdown inducing to do this. So Cheryl, I'm really appreciating how wonderful your intro was and how coherent and detailed. So mine will be a little bit more off the cuff. That was just what I had spoons for. So I think maybe that's even a way to start is, what I've learned on this autism journey is that sometimes there's a real gulf between what I want to happen and what I actually have the capacity for to happen. So this intro will perhaps be a manifestation of that. I am here midday. I'm still wearing my bathrobe and my clothes I slept in because I had a really busy week last week. And yeah, part of my kind of embracing of autism is an accepting of a capacity that fluctuates day to day. Going back a little bit, My name is Patrice Riley, and I live in California, but I grew up on the East Coast of the United States in Massachusetts and moved out here about 19 years ago. I didn't know about autism until about 2 years ago, or I knew about the stereotype of little boys being kind of given the autism label if they were obsessed with trains, which I think is what a lot of our kind of general overculture thinks of as autism, or at least has until recently. And I had a childhood that was really impacted by some complex trauma. There was an alcoholic family situation, and I've done a lot of healing around that for the last 25 years of my life. So that required me to move away geographically to kind of see the situation more clearly, and involved a really long kind of buffet of healing modalities between 12-step meetings, for families of alcoholics, and all kinds of therapies. I found EMDR therapy to be extremely helpful for navigating complex trauma. And then I did a smattering of other things, going to the most extreme of doing some psychedelic healing. And by about 2020, 2021, I'd resolved the PTSD diagnosis I'd been diagnosed with in 2011, which on the one hand felt really amazing to have been kind of given that kind of validation that I've done that much healing. But on the other hand, I felt really confused because I didn't actually feel that much better. And as I looked around at my life, I didn't really enjoy the flow of my days. I'd often wake up and I'd look at the day ahead. I'd look at the job I needed to do all day. I'd look at whatever appointments I had after work, whether it was a haircut or a friend wanted to have dinner. And I would think to myself, I can't wait till I get to bed again. And I just thought, this is so sad. And if I did all this healing, what was the point? And so I stayed in this place of not really understanding what was wrong for a good 6 months to a year. And I really just felt so frustrated. And then one day I heard a podcast where a woman was describing autism in women, and adult women specifically. And it was just this very quiet moment of everything changed, because everything she described was everything I experienced. And it immediately gave me so much context and understanding of why life still felt so hard. So that led me onto, as autistics, often we get interested in something and learn everything about it. So I read a million books, and I joined Matthew's free discussion groups, Matthew in this group, and then later did his 5-week workshops, and then ended up in this coaching consortium and the training we did last year. And then tangentially, I was also doing internal family systems work with my own therapist at the time. And I found that to be profoundly helpful in sorting out what kinds of unwritten beliefs, unconscious beliefs I had about myself and what I was supposed to be doing. A big one was I was supposed to be working in a corporation and having a big group of friends I'd have like spontaneous hangouts with and get married and live with my partner. And through the work in IFS, I was able to really let go, really call it unburdening a lot of these beliefs, and really bring in what is authentically what makes sense for me, which is a life that involves a lot more quiet, a lot more solitude, a lot more planning, and what we would call a low demand lifestyle. And because IFS was so helpful to me, I enrolled in many courses where I learned how to become a practitioner of IFS. So now I help others using an IFS-informed approach. And the two niches I am most directed towards are autistic women and members of the Irish diaspora who are confronting a lot of the same challenges that I resolved in my own healing journey. So I'm really excited about this journey and this podcast, and looking forward to sharing our stories and hearing from some of you as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrice. I appreciate that. Matt, are you ready to go into the gauntlet?
Thank you very much, Cheryl and Patrice. And I can have a hard relate to Patrice, and also this entire piece, doing intros, being extremely meltdown inducing and never knowing how to do that. So I'm Matthew, and I'm an autism peer support coach. I'm based in Paris, France. And Yeah, I'm really bad at these intros. I speak for a living, but I never actually know what to say or when to say it or what's appropriate in these kind of things. So hopefully, dear listener, you can appreciate my autistic deer in the headlights introduction. I was diagnosed when I was a kid, when I was nearly 3 years old, and I grew up being the weird kid and being in special classes and being traumatized by my world and my school and also via ABA. In addition to being autistic, I've got a lot of other things going on. I'm ADHD as well, PTSD, POTS, asthma, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and that's just a lot of stuff, right? It's just a lot of stuff, and I'm sure I'm leaving some things out that I just don't even want to talk about. So I grew up in a, weird situation, not fitting in and knowing it, and then going to quote unquote therapy and being traumatized 3 days a week for pay, not my pay, their pay. And yeah, that was just life. But I eventually kind of found my way. That's the positive. People think that when you're diagnosed as a kid that like somehow like you were brought up like with neurodiversity and like knowing what that means and autism positive, and that wasn't my experience. That's nobody's experience, by the way. Maybe for kids today. But I grew up essentially believing that I was deformed in my brain and that I was a fuck up. And if I wanted to succeed, I have to overcome my disability, overcome everything. And I believe that I actually had. That's the wild thing. Is I really thought I did. And I made friends. I had friends. I was always the weird kid. And my friends were weird and we were happy to be weird and we didn't care and that was cool. But then I got to college and I went into what today we know as burnout, right? And I understood that they didn't call it that then. They called it autistic depression. This is the early 2000s during the height of the George Bush era, the Iraq War, and all this. And I remember going to the health center at my school, and they asked me, "Have you ever been evaluated for autism?" I go, "Yeah, of course. Like, I have, and I have overcome it. Like, and look, I'm here now, and I'm doing great." I honest to God, believe that. And I just remember the face that the guy made, like like a puppy dog face, like, "No, honey, like that's not how it works." And he told me that this is like a depression that autistic people, especially students, go into, right? Again, they didn't have the language; they just knew they recognized it, and that's for the first time. Like, well, I had been in autistic spaces my whole life. They were never intentionally positive autistic spaces. So like now, at like age of 18, I was finding myself in like an autistic friendly, positive, autistic run space. And this is in the very beginning. This is again early 2000s. Like the word neurodiversity had only been used for a few years, and how I would hang out with autistic people online at that point was on Other Planet, a forum that existed for autistic people back then. And this is the first time now I'm sitting with others talking about like we're not fucked up, we're just different, and we're disabled, but we're not bad, and like disability and like social model of disability, like all these things which like people today take for granted. I don't remember, it's 2004, 2005, like whatever year it was, like I like that blew my fucking mind. And like I had never heard that before, I never thought about that before, and being in that space helped me to kind of come out of burnout pretty fast, relatively, right? Not years, not even in a matter of months. Like I was thriving and I understood what was going on and I started embracing and being open about that and being in spaces that were positive. Again, like not just being with a bunch of autistic people who aren't necessarily autism positive isn't always, a positive experience. To use the word positive again. But that's not to say that like it's a toxic positive space. Like that's really bad too. Like we talk about the struggles. We talk about the things that are hard. It's not about that. It's not about, these people out there who go, autism's not a disability, it's my superpower. Like, not this. Like, it can be a superpower and it could be like a horribly disabling and debilitating thing. And that was awesome. And at that point I started mentoring other students. And I never stopped. And I continued doing that through my, academic career. And then I went on and I had a career in the business world, and I continued to mentor people on the side and develop what I have today as a peer support coach over the last, 16, 17, 18, who's counting, years, and educating the public, autistic and non-autistic publics, about what autism is. I feel like people spoke about food they liked. I like food. I like dogs. I'm also a rabbinical student. I go to a rabbinic seminary where I'm studying to be a rabbi and working on my doctorate on neurodivergence in the Babylonian Talmud for people who are interested in things like that. And it's been really awesome meeting all of you here, Cheryl and Patrice and Aradia, and working with you. And maybe another time I'll read like my journal entries on what I think about this podcast and think about the work that we're all doing, and reveal my inner thoughts, because I'm feeling again deer in the headlights. But I'm just so honored to be here on this journey with you and talking about these conversations, because these conversations are how we express ourselves, and then I think people are looking for them, and we capture here what people want to do in an Instagram post but can't. And I find it ironic that so many of us get so much of our information from TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and all these these forums and books, and they're really helpful, but a lot of us can't express ourselves in those ways also. And so there's a lot of voices being left out. So I'm glad that maybe those of you listening will hear our voice, but maybe that will inspire you to have your own voice and put your voice out there in whatever medium it is, because hearing other people's voices is the absolute thing that's how we fight this. That's how we make change, by hearing other people's voices and being part of that conversation. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. And I'm so excited to be doing this with all of you. I don't have nearly enough podcasts going in my life. I'm so happy to be starting another one that's actually grounded in the real world. My other podcasts are all. Anyway, I don't do deer in the headlights either, obviously. So yeah, those are my co-hosts, and I am Aradia. As you can gather, I'm a podcast producer and podcast co-host, and I'm also a peer support coach. I am a millennial, I'm non-binary, self-identified, and I live in the Pacific Northwest. I first learned about autism in the early 2000s when my mom was diagnosed with what was then called Asperger's. And she very quickly found her way into the neurodiversity movement, something which I did not realize the value of or the amazing timing of until kind of quite recently. I just assumed that was everyone's experience. It's like, oh, you get diagnosed, you join a support group, you learn that being disabled isn't necessarily a bad thing. That's just like the normal path, right? Recently, I have learned no. She had a very, very lucky threading of the needle into some really cool early neurodiversity stuff. So I learned bits and pieces of how I was different and how to take care of myself starting at age 12. But for reasons that can very quickly be summarized as internalized ableism, I didn't really let that information fully matter until I was 32. So 20 years of incremental realizations, nonlinear progress, strange false starts that kind of all burst into full flower just a couple of years ago. Now I get it, but it took 20 years. Yeah, one sort of breaking point, burnout point led to another, leading me to find Matt's discussion circles and to join in with a rising tide of autistic people who are self-identifying and self-defining themselves as neurodivergent and deserving of neuro-affirming care and contexts. In the interim, while I was struggling with not admitting I was autistic, I did go to college to study geology and geography, which is also where I met my biggest online community, which is the Wheel of Time fandom. That's actually how I ended up becoming a podcaster in the first place and finding myself comfortable in online spaces. And so now geology is just a special interest that I don't have to work on enjoying, which is kind of cool. Growing up, I was actually in a Waldorf school. And that was such a collection of weirdos doing weird, non-normal things that I always thought that the reason I was weird was just because I was a Waldorf kid. And my disjunct from mainstream kids was entirely school-based, entirely culture-based. It's definitely been a strange process learning that Waldorf was, in fact, just a weird incubator that just made it harder to tell. I definitely feel like I went into burnout as a kid just from not understanding my sensory needs. And that's been a big part of the last few years of my life, has been learning what exactly does stress me out. Much like Patrice, I did a therapy trajectory that fixed some things. It helped some things. It identified some things. And then I got to the end and I was like, why does half of me feel completely unresolved? Completely unresolved. And that was really like what led me into being like, well, maybe this autism thing my mom's been talking about for so long has some merit to it. Yeah, I really struggled a lot with social stuff, social pressures, definitely going to a Waldorf school and then trying to go to college was like, I don't know how to deal with large quantities of people. And surely this is just Waldorf. Surely this is just my Waldorf education. It's not autism. Now I know it was both. It was definitely both. I found my way to this final revelation also through TikTok. It was definitely also the magic of the algorithm, reading books, getting super immersed in it. But yeah, Cheryl, much like you said, reaching that point of being like, oh, I've learned all the 101 stuff, and now I have to delve deeper into my own experience and become an expert of my own experience, gaining confidence in that. Like I never had any confidence in myself because there was all this internal ableism and all these shoulds. I should be able to do this. I should be able to do that. I could do it yesterday. I should be able to do it tomorrow. Like all of that was just getting in my way of ever trusting my own experience. And now trusting my own experience leads me to feel like I can trust my own experience. And it's been, so much has unlocked for me, starting with the algorithm telling me, hey, maybe check this out. But now being like, no, I am my own algorithm. Finding my community, finding my co-hosts, having these conversations has been a very logical progression, but also I never expected it to happen. I thought I could just should myself into being a proper normal person. I don't know any proper normal people. Let's be honest. Like I don't know any of those. It's a myth. It's a myth we're all holding on to. So yeah, for me, podcasts are one of the main vehicles I get information through. I'm one of those people that needs to have voices in my ears all the time. I love making podcasts. I love listening to podcasts. And I'm really, really excited to be part of making this podcast with all of you. And yeah, talking about something more serious than the Wheel of Time, because I love the Wheel of Time, but this stuff has a much more real applied utility, I think. All art is important, but this is a really good conversation. Oh my God, this is the worst intro I've ever done. You guys all did great. Just by the way, I'm going to have to do nothing to edit yours. Mine's going to be a fucking mess. It's fine.
It highlighted our personalities so well. The only reason I prepped mine was because I couldn't do it on the fly like you guys. Like, it's not one better than the other. It's just I think through writing. And so when I wrote my life on paper, it was like, oh, this feels right. Whereas other people who don't do that, they do so much better just speaking from the heart. And I think that takes all kinds in this group, this collective.
I was just going to say, when we're doing these in our own authentic ways, even if they're really different from each other, I think that's actually really important for our audience to hear, oh, these people are just doing what's true to them. And thereby we're modeling what authentic living and unmasking looks like. So I'd rather have it that way, even with like messy parts, than like this like polished, yeah, because then it's like too much editing and like making it sound a certain way. Isn't that just more masking? So I don't know. It's a question. And, conversely, I once heard Devin Price talk on a podcast, and they asked him at the end, like, okay, so like, what's like one takeaway we can like take from what you just said? And he was like, well, like part of autism is I can't think of an answer on the spot. So I guess like what I can tell you is like, I don't know. I would need to like go for a walk for 2 hours to like have the answer come to me. I just loved that answer because not only was it authentic, but it like shared what autism is like for a person. Like I can't collude with your need for like a polished, like all like, yeah, soundbite response. And he did it like, I'm thinking about this years later because it gave permission to me, I think, to just kind of like be myself versus be polished. So,
well, thank you all for the reassurance that my chaos is fine. And yeah, you're right. That is now our audience has a sense for what all of our voices can be. Remember, of course, we are autistic people. We might sound completely different tomorrow or next episode. That's how we roll. So there we have it. A friendly and autistic discussion around introducing ourselves. You got a sense of all of our voices, how we are different, how we are the same, how we interact, what our rapport is. And that's what our first episode is going to be. When we return in 2 weeks, I think we're going to do an every other week release schedule. We will be covering a topic from one of our 3 pillars. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but we will find out and you will get to discover it with us. So like and share and follow and do all of the things that interact with us and help us move up the great algorithm to get us to the next person that needs to hear what we have to say. Please write to us at the email address that we will definitely figure out in the not too distant future so we can hear your feedback and comments. And remember to drink water, because everyone needs to drink water. Autistic Stuff for Autistic People is a production of Fox and Draven Media. For more podcasts from Fox and Draven Media, visit our website, foxanddravenmedia.com.